respond that way. So you can treat it as a live coffee hour. We just won't be able to respond kind of in real time. So yesterday, the Governor's Budget Office presented her executive budget recommendations to the House and Senate Appropriations Committees. And so that is what I'm going to be reviewing today for you. As background, yesterday's presentation is kind of a kickoff to this budget cycle. So the timeline for this typically is the governor will present the budget or her budget recommendations to the legislature, to the appropriations committees, and then the next couple of months, appropriations subcommittees will meet and kind of go over her recommendations and the legislature's priorities and put forward a budget that then is negotiated with the governor's office. And that is usually, a final budget is typically passed in June or July. But that all kind of depends on what's going on in that particular year. But that's typically the timeline that we stick to. So there's a lot of details from yesterday. I'm just going to kind of be covering some top line things that I think are exciting or important. There is a ton more information though available. So if you are, a policy wonk, or you're just interested in diving a little bit deeper into the details, there are a ton more documents and information available on the state budget office website, and that is michigan.gov/budget. So feel free to take a look there if you're interested. Overall, really excited about the budget proposals that were put forward yesterday. I think that there is some significant investment in things that are going to help people, families, students, schools, businesses get back on their feet as we are kind of exiting, hopefully, the pandemic. And so that is kind of exciting point to kind of kick off from. And then I do just want to kind of make a distinction here that this is separate from the governor's COVID-19 recovery plan. We talked about that a couple weeks ago, and I reviewed that I think 2 weeks ago in a coffee hour, and went through how the governor had proposed distributing the federal funding specifically for COVID-19 recovery, and then that needs to be appropriated through the legislature. So that is separate from the state budget, which is what I'm talking about today. So I just wanted to make that distinction. Just because, I'm not going to be discussing vaccines or anything like that today. So moving into education first, obviously we know students have really been struggling during the pandemic, and our teachers and our schools have been really, really awesome in trying to accommodate virtual learning. But it's not lost on anybody that it's been a really hard year. So a couple of the budget recommendations that address some of these challenges include $250 million in supplemental funding to implement best practices to support students' academic recovery, and that includes physical and mental health issues as well. And I think it's really important that we address that in a real way, because we know that students have been struggling more than just with academics, having to make these huge shifts in their school year and how they're learning. $200 million in one-time funding for declining enrollment to stabilize budgets for districts experiencing losses in the next fiscal year. $120 million to provide opportunities in 2021 and 2022 for students through summer learning, after-school programs, day camps, anything kind of designed to support student needs that are outside of the normal school schedule. Funding for the Education Emergency Relief Fund, and that is intended to help mitigate the impact of COVID-19 on students, and that will be funding for both public and non-public schools. $32 million to Great Start Readiness Program, $2.9 million to address the educator shortage that a lot of districts are struggling with. So that provides more support for current teachers, as well as incentives to recruit past or future teachers. And then a $203 million increase base to per pupil funding, which is really great to see a continued investment in K-12 education, even as we're kind of grappling with the pandemic still. And then there is a $14.1 million kind of total investment in economically disadvantaged students. So that would include English language learners, special education students, or students in rural or isolated districts. Moving into higher education, $120 million in one-time funding for the Michigan Reconnect program. So we've talked about this in a couple of coffee hours, but if you've missed it, this is the program that provides a tuition-free pathway to industry certificates and associate degrees for people 25 or older as a way to try to fill skills gaps in the state. And then a $60 million one-time investment for the Futures for Frontliners program. So that's a little bit of a newer program, but we have talked about it before. This funding would fully fund the first kind of cohort of essential workers who have applied for this, and then hopefully expand the program so it can include newly unemployed essential workers from November of last year to January of this year. And then $70 million to help colleges and universities with COVID-19 measures. So again, a lot more in the higher education budget recommendation, but those are just kind of top lines that I pulled from it that I thought were important investments that were being made. Moving into healthcare, so $360 million for a direct care wage increase that would make permanent the $2 an hour wage increase that the governor had put into place with the legislature during the pandemic. So this would just make that permanent, which I think is a really important thing to do. I think everybody, knows that direct care workers, one, we need more of them. Too many people are leaving the profession, and they are absolutely critical to helping families stay healthy and be able to sustain a normal way of life and quality of life. And then going into $38 million in one-time funding for nursing home COVID-19 payment to address the loss of revenue from reduced bed capacity because of the pandemic. $91 million to improve access to behavioral health for Medicaid enrollees, and $15 million to state psychiatric hospitals for capital improvements and maintenance and things like that, which again, really exciting to see. I think the kind of mental and emotional burden of the pandemic has impacted people in different ways. And so expanding access to those services is really important. And then I've kind of looped together infrastructure and the environment. I think they kind of go hand in hand often. So there is a $300 million investment for local bridge bundling. And so that is to help repair or replace about 120 local bridges that are in serious or critical condition. There is a $290 million investment in infrastructure grants for the Michigan Clean Water Plan. So that is kind of backing up to the beginning of the coffee hour. The Michigan Clean Water Plan was part of the COVID-19 kind of recovery plan. So this supplements that to address sewer overflows and mitigate public health risks by removing sewage discharge from surface water and groundwater, and then to eliminate septic systems. $15 million for Dam Safety Emergency Fund. So this is for emergency responses when dam owners are unwilling or unable to mitigate hazards caused by dam malfunction. This is in response to what we saw happen in Midland over, I think it was in May. So this would help hopefully mitigate the risk of that happening again, but then also trying to cut down on the damage that it creates if a dam does malfunction. $20 million to protect the state from cyber threats. $20 million for contaminated site cleanup. So this supports rapid response to contaminated sites that pose an immediate threat to the public or public health. And then investments in cutting down the state's carbon footprint and incentivizing businesses and companies in the state to create more renewable energy improvements. And then finally, so Senator McMorrow serves on the Council for Future Mobility and Electrification, which was created last year. And we're really excited to see that in the governor's budget recommendation, there was a $25 million investment in kind of umbrella categories here, but environmental sustainability, autonomous vehicle deployment, workforce development, and then addressing mobility inequities in underserved areas. So that is an exciting kind of piece of this as well, because the work that Senator McMorrow is kind of tasked with on this council is to better position the state to be a major player and leader in the mobility and electrification space. So again, I know that was a ton of information all at once, lots of numbers to kind of go through. And again, these are just kind of top line things that I pulled from the budget recommendation presentation, and feel free to dive a little bit deeper if you're interested on the State Budget Office website. If you have any questions, are looking for clarification or more details on any of this, feel free to email our office. Other than that, it's kind of what I have for you today. So everyone have a wonderful weekend, a good Galentine's and Valentine's Day, and we will see you next week.